So the filmmakers from Dark in Berlin.
Yep. Thank you so much. I'm Gina Crow. I'm the director of Dark in Berlin and co-founder of Red Kite Film.
I'm Claire Dundee. I am a producer on Dark in Berlin and co-founder with Gina of Red Kite Film, a woman-focused film production company.
My name is Evelyn Wu Huang. I'm the production designer on Dark in Berlin.
My name is Nicole Plaza. I'm executive producer at All of It Now. A little bit about All of It Now. We're a team of real-time content creators who work in both like music, live touring, and events, as well as film production and virtual production. So we just wrapped up Fallout as the operations team there. And then in regards to Dark in Berlin, I act as VAD supervisor on this production.
And I'm Shelley Sable. I'm a creative producer for Fuse Technical Group. We were a production partner for Dark in Berlin, and we build pop-up and permanent volumes all over the world. Recent projects include things with ILM, Walt Disney, and we also worked on Fallout Season 1.
Yeah, so we set out to make a film entirely shot in volume. So today we're going to do a full creative breakdown of how we used Unreal Engine, the sets we built, and then we'll dive into a cost analysis of what it was like to shoot virtual production versus physical production. And finally, we'll end with some questions. Thank you for holding for this amazing high-tech device. So as a director, I approached virtual production in a totally new way with this film. We wanted to facilitate a direct assessment of how we could make bigger budget action movies and explore the production value while still keeping budgets in a reasonable place. And this assignment was sort of like a fun exploration of how creative decisions could be guided within those parameters to really maximize these tools and begin to shoot anything from sci-fi fantasy, but in this film all the way back to just reality. What would it look like if we recreated another city in LA? So that was really the core goal. I shot previous work using the volume in sci-fi fantasy space. And with this movie, I wanted to see if we could take any script and really push it to the limits of what we could do just within that volume. So the entire film we just watched was all shot in a semicircle shape of the Mandalorian helmet volume in Glendale, California. It took a huge amount of effort to explore what those floor plans would look like and what the blocking would look like and how each frame would follow one another. And I loved the process of using virtual production because you get to explore all of those scenes and shots way before you ever step on set. So part of how I approach this process in general, it begins with narrative development. As I've begun to understand virtual production and shoot more with this technology, I start to see different scenes and shots that I've never seen before when I'm reading a script, which is really exciting. So we put together the project entirely with our partners, Photochem, Ari, and Fuse, and we were looking for the story that we were going to bring to life in the context of this proof of concept. And I have a prior life as a DJ. So I was playing in Berlin opening weekend of COVID, and the city was absolutely wild. All of the ravers and club goers were out. We were playing party after party going around. Ended up at Berghain, and it was an incredible moment in the culture of the nightlife in general, and the energy felt so wild it was almost dangerous. And I was like, this is the perfect place for a film. This is the perfect place for a dangerous, kind of scary film where we get to explore what a person would do and how they would move through this city if they were seeking something. So I connected with our writers, Yalan Tu and Matt Bosak, and we began to develop Dark in Berlin, the feature script. When it came to making this film, we pulled out a few scenes and started world building and developing the character arc in a way that we could shoot it practically all at Fuse, moving through these different sets, worlds, using Unreal scenes, 2.5D car process, all of the kinds of tools that we have available to us as filmmakers these days. And as I was going through that process, the clarity of vision became really clear to me. Like, I think can be kind of scary approaching virtual production as a filmmaker and trying to figure out what everything's going to look like. But the way that our teams have built incredible tools to previs, scout, flying around in Unreal, delete walls, add people, it's really an incredible process. So I just loved the experience of getting started on this film. And Claire and I joined forces.
That we did. And one of our main goals was to find out if we could prove that virtual production was more or less cost effective than traditional filmmaking methods. And luckily we had amazing sponsors and we were able to prove that it was by 33%. And in order to get that number, we took our budget and put back all the bells and whistles from any partnerships that we had, rates for our teams back at market value, and then compared that full traditional or virtual production budget to a traditional budget that came from a Berlin film company with no context other than this is our script, we want to shoot it in Berlin, what's that number going to be? Give us a line item budget, and we compared those two to get that number. And I can talk about how that's broken down later on in this presentation.
Yeah, so diving into the narrative, the train station was our first scene, and we recreated the Hauptbahnhof using Unreal Engine, virtual humans, animated train sequencing, and everything was shot at infinite blue hour. Eva, take it away.
Cool. So hi, again, my name is Eva. I'm the production designer in Darken Berlin. And I think when Gina and I started kind of stepping through what this world would look like, something that I was just thinking the whole time is like, yes, we can build things as they actually look. Of course, we can make a one-to-one digital model, but why do that when we just can do whatever we want? That's like the big benefit here, right? And so a little backstory, I'm from DC. Like I always thought that the DC metro stations look a little bit like Star Wars. And they've got this like beautiful like shoot-like quality. And I just remember thinking like when you have this world where you have two sisters, they have a sort of like, this becomes like their launching pad. It's like a linear delineation of their journey through space as they work through all of these obstacles. It launches them on their hero's journey in a way. And so I think that, you know, as this was actually like maybe our most straightforward set simply because the interactions are so, they stay within like the fore and the midground. And I think that what we were able to do on this one, because this was also first in shoot order, we were able to kind of like show the crew in like a clear and concise way what it means when you are able to blend what's in physical space versus what's in digital space. It's like a very neat layout of that. And kind of the way that I like to approach it is to always add little bits that disturb them. It's like, you know, the little things that are the minutiae of life, like how air sort of breathes a little bit when you're not looking at it too carefully because you've got dust particles floating through light. Or maybe that's like, I don't know, when you're in New York City in specific, you get like little like puffs of smoke coming out of the ground because, you know, it's cold outside, whatever. People are doing laundry. And it's these little pieces of atmosphere that kind of blend what's in the foreground and what's in the background. And so I think that this scene in particular, I'm actually quite proud of because again, it's maybe just like the least, there's the least amount of VFX on it and there's like the least amount of like struggle with the shot. This is like everything used as it was intended to use. There's no like extra like bells and whistles and whatever on top. And I think that, oh, this is fun. This is playback in camera. I think that's something that Gina can maybe speak more to is just how this kind of all plays out. So like this is actually literally what we shot. There's no like additional set dressing once we get in camera.
And you can see the wide, you know, this is the actual LED volume that's in Glendale that we shot in. It's like 62 feet wide, 51 feet deep, just to give you a sense of scale a little bit.
What's so fascinating about operating in this space is you start to redefine how we set up a shot. So together with your first AD, picture's up, it's quiet on set, and before you roll sound, you roll Unreal. And Unreal needs to speed and Unreal needs to be operating. And then you roll sound, and then you roll camera. And something we were really playing with in this scene was cueing our virtual background in our train. So cue train, cue train comes before you cue action. So it adds a whole new department that you're calling in your production order. And it also is a completely new experience for the actors because they're here waiting for something that then they can see and move with, making it feel really natural when they're coming out of a wall, out of a train, which is a fantastic experience in general to go through with both Christine Ko and Miki Ishikawa. They did a great job. I think that the parallax and the way the camera worked in the scene was really beautiful, and it's a fantastic spot to kind of launch into the movie. From there, our next Unreal scene was the nightclub, and this was by far our most complex scene, our most involved VAD scene, and narratively, we were exploring a lot of spatial elements. I was really trying to do something more vertical and to explore a set that was going to descend, that we would follow Mira on her journey to rescue her sister from one room, through a floor, down some stairs, across the entire action sequence, which was the point of making this proof of concept to gain funding for the feature. So we moved from the stairs to the dance floor to the sex dungeon. And as we began to map it out, it was a whole situation. You know, I always think the best production designers are also architects. And I think that still flies in the virtual production space.
I mean, specifically, I think what Gina's talking about is my psychosis about keeping the logic of the digital space with the shooting space. Like, the world logic has to make sense, because again, I think what's really important here is that, you know, at least in Los Angeles, for the most part, people have played with virtual production, and they're aware of what's happening. They understand the computer is now the backdrop. They get it. But when there's nothing more confusing than walking onto stage, seeing three things and thinking, oh, and the computer does the rest. And so being able to keep that space logic in digital space and also making it clear for crew is something that I think helps us when we're writing the schedule, when we're trying to like set forth how people are going to act in the space. It's much easier than green screen because you do see everything that's behind you, but at the same time, having that logic, that order as you work through the space, not flipping back and forth, creating a sort of logic to not just the narrative structure, but also to like the physical structure is very important.
And you created a logic and showcased it by making these little videos to explain to people the journey.
And as a VAD team, like having Eva have an architecture background, she was able to work natively in Rhino, build her models in her native software, and then hand them off to us to retexture materials and add details to those scenes. So it was a real seamless process for us in terms of our collaboration, in terms of our understanding of the space, and us just like yelling at people constantly, like, no, we can't move that.
This is a fantastic example of like how we're going to communicate to crew all the different sets, all the different setups. The rehearsals that I mentioned in the beginning, the pre-light rehearsals, they're not just for your lead actors, but our stairs is at the top left, then our dance floor scene, and then our two sex dungeon scenes where we digitally twinned to move into a 360 setup where we actually built walls so both A and B cam could shoot in 360 volume.
Totally.
So was like so essential. These pictures were so essential.
So basically, like what we did in Rhino is we built the whole digital model, right? We 3D whatever, and we did like a basic texture map just so Nicole's team has like a signifier for like what kind of materials we're going to want to apply where, right? And we do a quick approximation. But then what myself, my art director, and my construction team did is we basically like create little chunks within the building, and then that's when that last diagram you showed with the labels on it kind of really comes into play here, because you're doing, okay, this chunk, this chunk, this chunk, and then we're going to go downstairs, this chunk, this chunk, this chunk, and then it becomes very easy to understand what's like a horizontal crossover and versus like a vertical crossover, right? And then I think, again, as we're moving through the spaces, considering I could only afford 6 columns and 3 walls, that's all I could afford, and we have to reuse things over and over, and I want to communicate a space that is much larger than what we're actually shooting. If you want to have that sort of mega scale of building that exists specifically in Berlin, you want to be able to like work with the materials that you're given, right? And I think that doing it this way, where you're kind of like moving through the space and able to like logically step out what can be done, what can be like a much bigger set, and extending what you already have, that's kind of like, it's just playing to your strengths.
For sure. And that was something that we really wanted to try just for the genre in general as we began to explore what the fight scene was going to look like. I think all action films need a scaffolding set that falls apart or someone dies on or you push them off and the set collapses. So this was our take on a very traditional action trope. I love the film Righting Wrongs with Cynthia Rothrock, shot in Hong Kong. It's two women and they're chasing each other over all sorts of city scaffolding. So we wanted to look exactly like that. And then additionally explore the descent of Mira's character into deeper danger, different levels, and what that would look like on the volume. So I think more exploration of like height in general, as we're thinking about shooting virtual production, a little less horizontal, is really fascinating because our cameras can now be places we would never have them in the physical world. You can't put a camera in the wall if you're shooting a staircase. You can maybe get it close, you know, but it can float around your techno crane in all sorts of new viewpoints that we've never had before, which is...
And also, just like practically speaking, like, you know, something that, you know, we were talking about yesterday when we were kind of going through these things is just the safety for stunts. So my team usually, basically, we touch everything that goes on set, except for the literal actors. We don't do that. But I think in this set in particular, something to consider is that it's not just a digital model that we're building. We're not just making it look pretty. What we're also doing is we're collaborating with the stunts team so that their rigging is safe, so that when they're moving through the spaces, they're able to understand how much space they actually have. They can ask us for any needs that they might have because we have all the real-time dimensions. Our digital models are built like with one-to-one fidelity to what actually ends up on screen, and everything that you see in front of you, that's a physical set, right? And so that's something, again, just as we're going through the planning process of like what's real, what's not, what do you need, what do you not need, what do you need us to custom fabricate for you so that all of the VFX shot makes sense as well as all of the in-camera VFX. That's like a huge conversation. Like, you know, as you said, you couldn't wild wall in Berghain. Also, when you do it this way, the planning process, it shortcuts it by like, I would say like at least 50% simply because you have a ceiling grid to rig things to. Safety wires.
Also with that, it times money, and that's where you see a lot of savings. All that upfront planning and having a streamlined shoot day, you will see cost effectiveness just through that to have everyone on one identical plan and go throughout the day with that in mind.
Mm-hmm. You also need less actors, less extras.
Yes. So I was brought onto the film. I met Gina at a nightclub in Las Vegas, and she's like, I want to build this nightclub in Unreal. It's for a movie. How do you like techno? How do you feel about brutalist architecture? And I was like, honestly, Gina, I have the team for you. So we had, you know, an Unreal environment artist who was really into brutalist architecture. We had a team of people who come from like a background in lighting design and touring productions, and being able to merge these worlds together was just like a joy for us. So we got to incorporate a lot of really fun things into the scene that I don't think that Gina realized was going to be a possibility. So here you'll see some virtual crowd members. We did a real-time virtual crowd on set. We built custom tools that we'll go into in a little bit. You'll see some DMX lighting that we were pumping into Unreal, and as well as having physical twin fixtures on set. Everything was synchronized, programmed through Grandemay Lighting Console. As well as if you're thinking about like our crossover volumes that we showed you earlier, we were also designing our lighting grid and lighting design with that in mind, knowing that we were going to have to shoot both down the barrel of the venue as well as perpendicular across the venue. So having a mirrored lighting grid was really effective for us. And here you can see the columns in the foreground with our Steptrons, Fattrons lighting fixtures, as well as their digital duplicates behind them. So we had guys sitting in Unreal replicating virtual lights. We brought lights into our studio and made sure like the output matched so that as we were programming one-to-one, everything would match up and be synchronized. And as you're watching this scene, you might see some familiar faces of the All of It Now team, as well as Kobe, our virtual production supervisor, dancing away. And here is a little previs shot from when we were doing tests in the office. On the right, you can see DMX values coming into Unreal. and how they're outputting within the scene. What we did find was that with the Fatrons, they had a lot of pixels, and we did not have the processing power to push as much data to them as we'd wanted. So we did have to sit and optimize quite a bit in order to make this work.
That's always the challenge with everything.
There was also a huge amount of work that we were doing as we started this process, thinking about the feature, thinking about the longevity of these assets. How can we build a proof of concept where we're now going to build a world that we can go back into when we're shooting these scenes for the feature film? All of the work's been done, all of the development's been done. And as we're thinking about what the crowd would look like and how they would dance and move, we realized there were no libraries of club goers that were really suitable.
Yeah, and with having Gina as like a female DJ as a background, we talked about we wanted to have a female DJ in our nightclub. But when we went into like the marketplace, looked at animations, there were no, like all the DJ motions were all masculine. So we talked about it. We talked about our nightclub goers. How do they dance within the club? Like, what is that scene? What does that feel like? And we decided, and with our partners at CBS, we're able to record custom mocap, as well as apply like more masculine motion to feminine forms, as well as applying more feminine motion to masculine forms, and kind of playing with the androgyny of the nightclub.
Definitely. After 10 years as a touring DJ, it is a queer space. It is a queer safe space. And it was really important to me that we build that mocap library and that world for when we're going into the feature. We're exploring the other supporting characters who come in. It's not just Mira and Zoe, but it's really building out all of the elements that we have in our physical, amazing, real culture mirrored in virtual reality.
Yeah, and I want to call out that Craig Weiss and his team from CBS VFX were great partners on this as well, and allowed us to utilize their space in LA to do a whole mocap day, which was great for the success of the film.
Then once they were animated and rigged as robots, we began to dress them like they were going to the club, which I had no idea this was going to be possible.
So like when you think about virtual art department, like a lot of times we're just talking about the environment, but on this one, I really got to dive in with Gina, talk about like the direction of the virtual characters, as well as sit with our stylist and go through costumes. We went through asset packs, trying to figure out what we could franken together, what is kind of in the style of each of these people. So we were able to build a variety of characters. I think we have 24 distinct characters that are throughout the nightclub, as well as like custom costuming and custom mocap.
They're Berlin ready. He's ready.
This was still early on, guys. Sorry.
Texture.
You can go to the next one, Gina. As well as while we were developing this, we knew that our guys on set were going to have to operate with a real-time crowd. So we also built custom tools to spawn that crowd as quickly as possible without having to manually place them, as well as have their motions randomized and spread out throughout the venue. So you'll see here, we built a seed system, so we were able to replicate everything of all those dancers. So if we needed to do a retake, and for sake of continuity, we need to have the same people in the background, we're able to replicate that. If we noticed, hey, there's two girls with blue hair that are dancing next to each other, like, are they twins? No, let's regenerate our crowd. And at the click of a button, we were able to respawn.
Moving into the sex dungeon and the third floor of the nightclub, this was kind of our boss fight level, you know, the end of the video game where you're up against the evildoer. I really loved how we got to build this world and how it ended up looking so unique compared to the other two floors, going from green to red, very Hitchcockian, very Vertigo. It was so much fun. You know, our consulting editor said about this film, action films are supposed to be fun and sexy. People want to feel a little bit afraid and a little bit turned on when they watch them. So that was really what we were trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, so this is a sample of kind of how assets came in and came to be. So Eva would send me pictures of physical props that she found as her and her team were outsourcing. I would take those images, bring them to my 3D modeler who would work in Blender. He would model them and then send them to an Unreal artist who would then texture and add materials to it. So then you can kind of see the whole process, our reference, our our gray box model as well as our previs.
And then I think something I want to just touch base on, I have to say that I think the PK, shout out PK, Psycho Facet 3D modeling, but also specifically there's some instances where it does make sense to actually 3D scan instead. So like my team never does like any sort of high fidelity scan. It's not usually necessary, but what it is helpful for is when you're doing stuff like practical lights. So yes, lighting team does all the lights. DMX team does all of the DMX lighting stuff, but also specifically when I'm putting physical lights on walls, I often like to go and do freaky lights, lights that you don't necessarily see in an everyday scenario. I call these my Eye of Sauron lights. And these have a very specific look to them because they're halogen bulbs. And doing that with the 3D scan with the actual texture map of the light being mapped into the 3D model is actually something that's really helpful because you can understand the spread of light and how that fall off actually happens. Because if you're just approximating off of a photo, you're not going to be able to understand in like true space what that fall off is, what's the actual diameter of your fall off, right? And that changes how the light looks. So in order for these things to look naturalistic and for them to look real, they actually have to have the 3D scan. And again, it's not necessary for most things, but for something like practical lights that are like specific kinds of bulbs, it's something that's like worth exploring.
Eva and I geek out on the details of what makes
Bloom.
what makes the light look perfect. I really love like these meat curtains, these clear atmospheric particles, like whether that be haze, a shower curtain, glass, shooting the wall through something clear, I feel always gives it an added layer of depth and dimensionality that is hard to accomplish otherwise. So we went through so many texture tests, testing mesh, testing plastic to make sure to avoid moire. And especially as we got into what this setup was going to look like and how we were going to do a fight scene all in the volume spinning around, those added textures became really important.
Yeah, I think that's something that, again, we're just always talking about the blend of things, right? There's nothing that's more jarring and more horrific than seeing a backdrop and then two actors standing in front of it and you can tell it was shot on a stage. Kind of makes me want to die. Like my ideal scenario as a production designer is for you to not actually understand what I did and for you to not understand that there is a tool that has a mark on the process, on the way that it looks, right? Like the visual should not be represented by the tools that you use. It should be about the creative. That's how I approach filmmaking, no matter what I'm given. And so I think in this specific scenario, when we're talking about these clear atmospherics, it's like, well, what would even make sense in a nightclub? And I think, part of the reason we went with like mesh and the meat curtains and the stuff is like, we're just talking about industrial spaces and being able to do that again, to help blend the worlds, like what's going to be something that's like tiny, not necessarily noticeable, but like it makes sense contextually is stuff like construction scaffolding. You know what I mean? It's going to be stuff, the loose, cool fabric that like hangs outside of buildings when they're redoing buildings. That kind of stuff. These meat curtains, like they're actually totally real. I made them for an industrial scene elsewhere and reused them here. Yeah. And then I think something else that I want to specifically call out in this one is like to add sort of like a sense of dynamicism and also just again we're I think hearkening back to like what we were doing in the beginning, launching the two sisters on this like linear pathway ish through this hero's journey to the big boss lair is I specifically requested this mover light, right, with this crazy like moving beam because it's kind of like I don't know, I had this like vision in my head of it like sweeping her towards evil, And so this is, again, it's one of those things that Nicole's team was able to set up and drive with the DMX lighting. And so it's something that since it works natively with the environment, we're not fighting what we've already built, which I think is really important to touch base on.
Flashes of light are also such a great tool in action editing and cutting together shots that might otherwise be very poor when they are next to each other. The light was such a great add for how intense and dynamic this scene ended up feeling.
It's almost like a visual, what is that called? When you're playing the piano, you've got the little thing, metronome.
Yeah.
It's like a visual metronome, right? And again, we're always talking about how to help the team get there because when your physical team is not understanding what's in your head, the best thing you can do is to give them cues, especially for actors. That way they understand the rhythm and the pacing and the front energy of what you're actually shooting. And it kind of, again, it just communicates something without you actually having to say it.
Great.
Yeah.
To wrap things up, we can dive into the numbers.
Yeah, so again, to try to prove that virtual production was more cost effective than traditional production. We had those two budgets, and to keep it relatively brief, we do have those budgets available for anyone who's interested, as well as a whole white paper that kind of dive into the actual numbers and the breakdown there. But to keep it for a global market, we went with percentages. And you often hear that, especially as a producer, virtual production sometimes is moving the post budget into pre and going along your day, but we found that it's not that at all. It's really redesigning the entire budget in order for the right departments to be onboarded at the correct time so that decisions are made holistically throughout the team and you're saving your time and pipeline in order to see those cost effective numbers. Pre-production is going to be, if we could go back really quickly, pre-production is going to be the most upfront cost spending for virtual production. We saw that it was 12% of the budget, and that's because you are onboarding important departments as like VAD and art department to really solidify that pipeline as early on as possible. Then for production, that's also where you're gonna see the most savings. You're all having your crew go to one place. You're not doing company moves. You're having less crew because you have your stage crew, as well as limited riggers, hands, etc. And it really makes it possible to see those savings compared to a traditional budget. And then finally, post-production, it's going to be the most similar, especially in our case, as we shot Final Pixel for both budgets. We followed a regular post-production trajectory. So compared to virtual and traditional, it was almost similar. So obviously our result was that 33% savings. Again, we have both budgets available with our whole white paper that kind of breaks it down line by line. So if anyone's interested, please reach out.
Red Kite Films.
Yes.
Red Kite Film, what's next? Yeah, so off this short, we've gone around the world. We've debuted it at Cannes Next in France this spring and have been attending festivals throughout the summer. We now have 4 feature films in development. Dark in Berlin, the action thriller feature, is out to market. Dogma 24 is a dystopic sci-fi drama that I'm writing with a British collaborator, and we're entirely writing it imagining we shoot virtual production. Like, it won't exist, it wouldn't be possible any other way, which was an incredible experience to realize that we could start to develop story that way. I Never Learned to Play is a psychological drama thriller about my life as a female DJ and what that was like in 2008 to 2014. And The Pomegranate is a collaboration with New State Pictures, medical drama.
I think we have to wrap here, but we'll be available.
Well, we'll be available outside for more questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you so much for coming.